This town had 42,000 residents in 1960. Today, 118. The post office opens for exactly 1 hour a day, and the woman who runs it is also the only person still collecting mail there for anyone except herself. She sorts 3 envelopes, locks the door, and drives 11 miles to a town that still has a gas station. That is not a horror movie. That is a real zip code in the United States of America, and it is not even the saddest place on the list you are about to hear. My name is ReportSTATE. I walk the places the maps stop drawing. Not the famous ghost towns with gift shops and guided tours, the other kind. The kind where the last streetlight blew out in 1989 and nobody came to replace it. The kind where the church is still standing because nobody knows who owns it anymore. The kind where a single human being wakes up every morning, makes coffee for one, and is legally, officially, demonstrably the entire population of an incorporated American municipality. America loves a story about growth. Frontier, boomtown, skyscraper, suburb. The map always adds, but every so often the map subtracts, and when it subtracts, it does it quietly. One post office at a time, one school closure at a time, one mine shutting its gates at a time. Nobody films the last day, nobody rings a bell. The town just starts to stop. I spent the last year driving to 10 of them. 10 American towns where tens of thousands of people once lived, worked, married, buried their dead, and now almost nobody does. 10 towns where the reason they died is specific and documentable. A mine, a mill, a rail line, an interstate, a river, a fire. 10 towns where there is still a last resident, and I talked to most of them. Before we go in, I owe you a teaser. One of these towns has an underground fire that has been burning continuously since 1962. 60+ years. Scientists estimate it has enough coal to burn another 250 years. The state eventually revoked the town's zip code because the town was still legally a town and the fire did not care. You will meet that town at number 3. Another one has exactly 1 resident. She is the mayor. She is the librarian. She runs the tavern. Every year she issues a liquor license to herself and then she files the paperwork to approve it. That is number 1, and when we get there, I promise you are going to sit very still for about 90 seconds. And there is one town on this list, number 1's quieter neighbor, where the state of Wyoming finally updated the sign last year from population 1 to population 6, because the guy got married and some cousins moved in. The original resident has been quoted saying he is not sure how he feels about the crowd. Subscribe before we start. I mean it, not because I need the clout, because the next time you are driving I-80 or US 25 or any blue-back highway in this country and you see an exit for a town you have never heard of, you are going to slow down and wonder. That wondering is the whole point. That is what the algorithm cannot monetize and what these places deserve. Subscribe, and when you see the exit, you will know the name. Let's break it down. Number 10. Picher, Oklahoma, the poisoned boomtown. If you had driven through northeastern Oklahoma in 1926, you would have seen one of the richest mining towns in the Western Hemisphere. 20,000 people, 14,000 mining jobs, a baseball team in the Ban Johnson League, movie theaters, department stores, lead and zinc pulled from the earth so fast that during World War I, Picher provided roughly half of all the lead the United States Army used to win that war. At its peak in the mid-1920s, the population was around 14 to 16,000 in the town itself, with the surrounding tri-state mining district pushing closer to 40,000 when you count the satellite towns of Cardin and Hockerville right next door. Main Street had electric trolleys, there was a hospital, there was a newspaper, the Picher Daily Tribune, and it actually came out daily. Then the mines closed. That part of the story is normal. Every mining town in America has that chapter. What is not normal is what the mines left behind. Chat piles, mountains of grey, powdery tailings from lead and zinc processing, as tall as 10-story buildings, hundreds of them, surrounding every street and schoolyard in Picher. Children used them as sledding hills. Adults built driveways out of the gravel. The local high school's football field was bordered by one. For decades, nobody thought much about it. It was just the landscape. Then the Environmental Protection Agency tested the children. In 1996, 34% of Picher kids under 6 had lead levels in their blood above what the federal government considers a poisoning threshold. 34%. 1 in 3 children in the town had been poisoned by the dust they were breathing every day. Home prices. There is no meaningful market. Federal buyout average in 2009, around $54,000 per property. Most refused for months. Cost of living, irrelevant because the town was condemned. Crime rate, 0 because there was nobody to commit crime against. The last pharmacy closed in 2008. The last gas station closed in 2009. A tornado hit in May of 2008, killed 8 people, destroyed most of what was left, and the federal government said, "Enough. We are buying you out. Please leave." Most did. A few did not. In 2013, the post office closed. In 2015, Oklahoma officially disincorporated the town. The last mayor, a man named Sam Freeman, a pharmacist by training, stayed on his porch for a while past the dissolution. He has since passed. The last confirmed resident, a man named Gary Lindemann, who owned the old miners' pharmacy, refused the buyout for years and kept the pharmacy open for exactly one customer, which was himself. He passed in 2015. As of the most recent census data, the incorporated population is 0. Here is the part that should make you stop. When you drive through Picher today, the chat piles are still there. They are not going anywhere. The ground is still poisoned. The EPA has declared it one of the most contaminated sites in the country. You can walk through what used to be Main Street and see the bones of a Rexall drugstore, a bank, a Masonic lodge. And on the door of the old City Hall, which still stands, somebody spray-painted, in what looks like the mid-2010s, the words, "We lived here." A Redditor who grew up in Picher before the buyout wrote, quote, "My grandfather worked the mines for 31 years and died of lung cancer at 58. My father sold our house to the federal government for $41,000 and cried the entire drive out. We used to have a parade every 4th of July down Main Street. I cannot bring myself to go back and look at it." End quote. Let me be honest with you. Picher is number 10 on this list, not because it is the least sad. It is number 10 because it is the most American. A town that gave the country half its war lead and got cancer and a buyout in return. A town the federal government did not save. A town the federal government erased. Picture this. It is October, late afternoon, and you are standing in the middle of what used to be 2nd Street. The chat piles rise on both sides of you, grey as gunmetal, casting long shadows across pavement that has not been repaved since 1992. There is no sound, no birds because there are not enough trees, no traffic because there is no reason to drive here. Wind moves through the empty window frame of the old Eagle Picher Mining Company office building, and it makes a long, low sound, like a throat clearing before speech that never comes. You think, for a second, somebody is about to say something. Nobody does. Nobody has for years. If Picher was erased by the ground itself, the next town was erased by something even stranger. By a single decision made in an office in Washington, D.C., that no railroad would stop there anymore. Number 9. Thurmond, West Virginia. The rail town with no road in. In 1910, Thurmond was the busiest passenger station on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. More freight moved through Thurmond than through Cincinnati and Richmond combined. Coal trains, 4 per hour, hauling the black heart of West Virginia to the industrial east. 3 banks, 2 hotels, the Dunglin and the Lafayette. A jewelry store that sold diamonds. The Dunglin Hotel hosted a continuous poker game that, according to local legend, ran for 14 years without stopping. One player allegedly lost a mine during the game. Another allegedly won one. Population at peak. Around 500 residents officially, but thousands passing through every day. Thurmond had no roads into it. The only way in or out was by train. You either got off a train in Thurmond or you did not come to Thurmond. That is not hyperbole. There was no road. The gorge around it is so steep and narrow that the builders ran out of flat land. The main street of Thurmond is the railroad tracks. The sidewalk is the platform. Then 2 things happened almost at once. The Dunglin Hotel burned down in 1930 and the railroads switched from steam to diesel. Steam engines needed constant stops for water and coal. Diesel engines did not. Thurmond was a water stop, and suddenly nobody needed to stop. The population began to fall. 500, then 200, then 100, then 40, then 15. Today's census, 5 residents. 5. Median home price. There is no market because you cannot get a conventional mortgage on a house you can only reach by rail. The national park now owns most of the buildings. The population of Thurmond is smaller than a kindergarten class. Cost of living. Low, except there is no grocery store within 30 minutes by car, and the car has to take a 1-lane gravel road that did not exist when the town was built. It was scraped in during the 1970s because the federal government decided 5 people deserved some way out that did not involve a locomotive. Crime rate, 0. Nearest hospital, 40 minutes by ambulance, assuming the ambulance can find the driveway. The last mayor, a woman named Margaret Whittaker, who died some years ago, once told a reporter from the Charleston Gazette, quote, "My husband and I stayed because the trains still run. They do not stop, but they still run. And when you grow up watching trains, the sound of them is the sound of the world being alive." End quote. Here is what nobody tells you about Thurmond. Amtrak's Cardinal line still stops there, 3 days a week. You can still today buy a ticket on Amtrak, get off at Thurmond, West Virginia, and be one of 2 people on the platform, including the conductor. The depot is a museum. It is staffed by a park ranger part-time. The ranger leaves at 5. There is a sarcasm to this place. Thurmond once had more millionaires per capita than any town in America. The Dunglin poker game supposedly had a pot worth $200,000 in 1919 money. Today, if you sold every building in Thurmond at fair market value, you might clear the price of a mid-tier SUV. The millionaires are gone. The gorge remains. The trains still pass without stopping, and the sound they make is exactly what Margaret Whittaker described. The sound of a world that no longer needs you, but is still generously running. Picture this. You step off the Amtrak Cardinal at 4:15 on a Tuesday afternoon. It is raining because it is always raining in the New River Gorge. You stand on the platform alone. The train pulls away. The ranger is not there today. There is a wooden bench. There is a sign that says, "Historic Thurmond." There is nothing else. You turn around and look at the gorge walls rising on either side, green with rhododendron, and you realize the train that just left will not come back this way until Thursday. If you do not have a car waiting, you live here for 48 hours. If Thurmond was erased by the engineering change from steam to diesel, the next town was erased by water, and by pride, and by a vote that, in hindsight, nobody who took it ever quite forgave themselves for. Number 8. Cahawba, Alabama, the capital that drowned. In 1819, Cahawba was chosen as the first state capital of Alabama. On paper, it made sense. It sat at the confluence of the Alabama and Cahawba rivers. It had steamboat access. It had fertile soil. It had ambition. Within a year, it had 3,000 residents, a state house, a governor's mansion, newspapers, churches, and a reputation as the Philadelphia of the South. It also had a problem nobody had checked carefully before the vote. It flooded. Badly. Every spring. In 1825, a flood crested high enough that legislators had to travel by rowboat through the streets to reach the Capitol building. They held the session anyway, reportedly, because the alternative was admitting they had made a mistake. 2 years later, the state capital moved to Tuscaloosa. Cahawba was no longer a capital, but it was still a town, and for a brief, shining moment, Cahawba recovered. By 1860, the population had surged to around 3,500, powered by cotton, by the new railroads, by the stubborn conviction that Alabama's oldest town deserved a second act. It had a jockey club. It had a social season. It had mansions with columned porches that faced the river. Then the Civil War. Cahawba was used as a Confederate prison camp, Castle Morgan, where roughly 3,000 Union soldiers were held in conditions that, to put it as gently as ReportSTATE's censorship policies require, were catastrophic. Disease swept through. When the war ended, Cahawba's reputation was ruined. The river flooded again in 1865, worse than before. Businesses relocated upriver to Selma. By 1870, half the population had left. By 1900, fewer than 60 people remained. Today's population, 0 permanent residents. 0. Cahawba is an archaeological park now, run by the Alabama Historical Commission. You can visit. You can walk the grid of streets where a state capitol once stood. You will see the foundations, the old well, the slave quarters preserved as a reminder, 2 standing columns of a mansion called the Picher House, and a silence that, if you know the history, is deafening. The last recorded resident, a man named Anderson Williams, an African-American farmer whose family had stayed on the land since emancipation, lived in Cahawba until 1962. He farmed the bottomland. He tended the old cemetery. He died, and after him, no one. Cost of living, home prices, crime rate, none of these categories apply. You cannot buy a lot in Cahawba. You cannot live there. The park closes at sunset. The Alabama state government, 3 capitals removed from this place, has designated it a permanent historical site. In other words, Cahawba is the only town on this list that the state of its origin has officially decided must stay dead. A visitor from Montgomery wrote in a state park guestbook, and this is real, quote, "I brought my daughter here because she asked why some places have ghosts and some do not. I told her ghosts are what a town leaves behind when it is taken before it is ready to go. Cahawba was taken before it was ready." End quote. Picture this. It is July, dusk. The cicadas are loud enough to vibrate your teeth. You are standing at the intersection of what used to be Vine Street and Capitol Street. The street grid is still there, traced faintly in the grass. The foundations of the old State House are visible as a rectangle of brick in the dirt, maybe 10 by 20 feet of surviving floor plate. You can stand inside it. You can stand, physically, on the spot where the first laws of the state of Alabama were signed, and there is nothing above you except Spanish moss and a sky turning indigo. And the river, the thing that drowned it, still moving about 400 yards to your left, indifferent and slow and brown. 2 state capitals later, Alabama is governed from Montgomery. Cahawba is governed by nobody, because there is nobody left to govern. From a capital that drowned to a gold rush town that never quite died, just froze. The next stop on this list is the one that every photographer in America has heard of, and almost none of them have actually been to. Number 7. Bodie, California. The Gold Ghost preserved in amber. 19-mile dirt road off Highway 395 in the high desert east of the Sierra Nevada. The road is brutal. The last 3 miles are unpaved washboard that will shake your transmission into a new alignment. You pay the entrance fee at a ranger station. You walk over a small rise, and below you, spread across a broad, dusty basin at 8,000 feet of elevation, sits Bodie. And Bodie, unlike every other town on this list, looks almost exactly the way it did when the last residents walked away. In 1879, Bodie had a population estimated between 7,000 and 10,000, though some sources push as high as nearly 20,000 at peak. It had 65 saloons. It had a red light district 2 blocks long. It had a murder a day, or close enough that the phrase "bad man from Bodie" became a common expression in the American West, meaning somebody you did not want to cross. It had a Chinatown of roughly 800 residents. It had 3 breweries, a railroad bringing in lumber, an opera house, and more than 2,000 buildings at peak. And it had gold. The Standard Mine pulled nearly $34 million of gold out of the ground in the 1870s and 80s, which in today's money is well north of $1 billion. Bodie was not a minor strike. It was, for a few years, one of the richest gold camps in California. Then the ore ran thin. The Big Fire of 1892 destroyed much of the business district. Population dropped to around 2,000 by the turn of the century. A second fire in 1932 started, according to local law, by a 2.5-year-old boy playing with matches, destroyed 90% of what was left. By 1940, fewer than 100 people remained. By the time the last residents left in the 1940s, there were about a dozen. Today, permanent residents 0. The state of California bought the site in 1962 and declared it a historic park. The California State Parks Rangers, of whom there are 3 who rotate living in Bodie, are technically the only residents. They are not counted by the census because their legal residency is elsewhere. So if you want to be strict about it, Bodie's population is 0, with 3 rangers on rotating shift. But here is what makes Bodie different. The state preserved it in what they call a state of arrested decay, meaning they do not restore it, they do not repaint it, they do not replace broken windows or fallen shingles. They stabilize what is there and they let it age. So today, you can walk through about 110 surviving structures, and inside many of them, through the dusty windows, you can see the furniture, the dishes on the tables, the ledger books open on the counters, the bottles still on the shelves of the old saloon, the pool table with balls racked, the schoolhouse with desks lined up, and a world map on the wall dated 1938. Home prices, not applicable. You cannot buy there. Cost of living for the rangers, provided by the state. Crime rate, 0. Though there is a persistent and beautifully absurd story known as the Bodie curse. Tourists who pocket a rusty nail, a piece of broken glass, a weathered shingle, anything from Bodie, allegedly receive bad luck until they mail it back. The rangers keep a thick binder of returned items with apology letters. One letter, from a woman in Ohio, reportedly reads, quote, "I took a small piece of obsidian from the hill behind the church in 1994. Since then, my husband lost his job, my dog died, and my car was struck by lightning. Please put this back where I found it. I am sorry." End quote. I cannot tell you whether the curse is real. I can tell you the binder is real, and it is thicker than some phone books used to be. The last permanent resident a man named James Kane, inherited much of the town from his family's mining company and lived there as a caretaker until he sold to the state. The final small handful of civilian holdouts in the 1940s and 50s included a woman named Mildred Jacobson, who ran a tiny post office out of a front room until the Federal Mail Service stopped delivering in 1942. Bodie did not die from one blow. It died from three. The gold ran out. The fires burned. The weather at 8,000 feet, where winter temperatures hit 30 below and snow buries the first floor of buildings, wore the survivors down. One of the last residents said, in a letter preserved in the Bodie Museum, quote, "We did not leave because we wanted to. We left because the wind never stopped, and one day we realized we did not remember why we were listening to it." End quote. Picture this: October, 3 in the afternoon. The high desert light is sharp enough to cut paper. You are standing in front of the Standard Mill, the only major intact stamp mill from the California Gold Rush era still on its original site. Inside, the stamps are frozen mid-air, the last crush of ore still in the chute from 1942. You walk down Main Street. The wooden sidewalks groan under your shoes. You look through the window of the Boone store in general merchandise. There are canned goods on the shelves. The labels are faded but still legible. There is a straw broom leaning in the corner. There is a spider web the size of a dinner plate stretched across the doorway between the front room and the back office. You try to imagine the day in 1942 when the last Boone locked the door. You cannot. Nobody can. The door closed and the town stopped, and the Rangers now, 80 years later, make sure it stays stopped in exactly that posture. Bodie is the ghost town other ghost towns dream of being: frozen, famous, protected. The next town on this list had roughly the same story and got none of the protection. It is much farther north. It is much harder to reach. And it is, in my opinion, one of the single most surreal places in the United States. Number 6. Kennecott, Alaska. The Copper Cathedral in the ice. If I told you to drive to Kennecott, you would fly to Anchorage, drive about 300 miles to the end of the road network at Chitina, and then take a 60-mile gravel road, the McCarthy Road, carved along an abandoned rail grade across a one-lane footbridge over the Kennecott River. Note the spelling. The river is with an I, the town is with an E. This is the result of a 19th century clerical error that nobody ever corrected. And from the footbridge, you either walk 4.5 miles or catch a shuttle van into McCarthy, and then another 5 miles up to Kennecott proper. That is the trip. In summer. In winter, the road is closed, and the town is reachable only by bush plane, snow machine, or very serious skis. In 1911, the Kennecott Copper Corporation, later just Kennecott, opened one of the richest copper mines ever discovered on Earth. Ore grades were stupefying. Some veins assayed at 70% pure copper. 70%. Normal copper mines get excited about 1%. Kennecott was pulling fortunes out of the mountain every single shift. The company built a self-contained town at the base of the Kennecott Glacier. At peak, roughly 300 people lived in Kennecott itself, with up to 500 more in surrounding McCarthy. That is not 5,000, that is not 40,000. That is 800 people in one of the most remote locations in North America, running one of the most valuable industrial operations on Earth. The mill building, 14 stories tall, painted a specific shade of company red that you can still see from 2 miles away, is the single largest wooden structure ever built in Alaska. Inside that mill, the ore was crushed, concentrated, and sent by a 196-mile private railroad to the port at Cordova, where steamships took it to Tacoma, Washington, to be smelted. Between 1911 and 1938, the Kennecott mine produced roughly $200 million of copper in 1930s dollars, which is billions today. In 1938, the company shut it down. Not because the copper ran out, because the grade had dropped and copper prices had collapsed in the Great Depression, and the company did the math and decided to walk away. The shutdown was sudden. Workers were given days to pack. The last train left Kennecott on November 10, 1938. Some workers, according to accounts, left dinner plates on the table, left coats on hooks. They were told the company might come back. The company never did. Today's permanent population of Kennecott, in the single digits in summer, essentially zero in winter. Nearby McCarthy hovers around 28 year-round residents. Home prices, a handful of cabins trade privately for sums that reflect their inaccessibility, which is to say, very little. There is no grocery store within the entire region that is reachable by road in winter. The nearest hospital is in Valdez, which is hours away in good weather and genuinely unreachable in bad. Crime rate, statistically zero. Practically, there is a thing called the McCarthy Mail Day murders, which I will not detail here due to the nature of this channel and the policies of our hosting platform. It happened in 1983, on one of the few days each month when residents gathered to receive mail. 6 people lost their lives. A local man was convicted. For a town this small, it was a defining trauma. Some residents moved away and never came back. The last permanent resident of Kennecott, in the old company town sense, the last person who tried to live year-round in the original company buildings, was a woman named Rose Marie Smith, who ran the Kennecott Kid Camp and Lodge operation until she handed it over to the National Park Service in 2000, and the federal government took over the structures as part of the Wrangell St. Elias National Park. I spoke, by phone, to a man named Doug Bennett, who spends summers in Kennecott now as one of the park's contracted interpretive guides. He said, quote, "You walk into the general manager's office on the 3rd floor of the office building, and there is still his desk. There is still the company logo on the wall. There is a calendar, and the calendar is turned to November of 1938. People ask me if we turned it. We did not turn it. Nobody turned it. It has been November of 1938 in that room for 85 years." End quote. Picture this. It is late June, 11 in the evening, and the sun is still up because you are at 61 degrees north latitude, and it will not set for real until around midnight. The light is the color of unstrained honey. You are standing at the base of the 14-story mill building. Above you, the red siding is weathered to the color of dried blood. Behind you, across a field of glacial gravel, the Kennecott Glacier grinds down from the Wrangell Mountains, cracking audibly every few minutes as ice the size of houses calves and falls. There is no traffic sound, no aircraft, no music, only the glacier, and the wind running through the broken upper windows of the mill, which produces a whistle that sounds, I am not making this up, exactly like a distant freight train. The mill that built an empire, the glacier that predates it by hundreds of thousands of years, the wind that will still be here when the mill finally falls. We are halfway through. 5 down, 5 to go, and the density of strangeness increases from here. The next town was a real estate scam that somehow built an opera house before it collapsed under its own lies. Number 5. Rhyolite, Nevada. The Millionaire's Mirage. Death Valley's Nevada side, about 120 miles northwest of Las Vegas, you turn off Highway 374 and drive up a gravel slope, and suddenly, sitting on the edge of the desert, you see the skeletons of a 3-story bank, a 2-story school, a train depot made of dressed stone, and a house constructed entirely out of 50,000 empty beer and liquor bottles set in adobe mortar. That last one, the bottle house, is real. It was built in 1906 by a miner named Tom Kelly, who could not afford lumber and noticed that the saloons in town were throwing out enough bottles every week to build a mansion. In 1905, gold was discovered at a nearby vein. By 1907, rhyolite had exploded to between 5,000 and 10,000 people, depending on which census and which brag you believe. It had 3 water systems. It had electric lights. It had an ice plant. It had a stock exchange, a symphony, an opera house, a school district, 50 saloons, 18 grocery stores, a public swimming pool, and the Cook Bank building, 3 stories of poured concrete and imported marble and stained glass, constructed for a sum that in modern terms runs into the millions. It had not 1, but 3 different railroad companies servicing it. The town was a financial creation as much as a mining one. Charles Schwab of Bethlehem Steel put money in. Wall Street speculators bid the mine stocks to absurd levels. The newspapers printed the optimism like scripture. Then the financial panic of 1907 hit. Credit froze. The banks that had loaned rhyolite's operating capital called in their notes. The biggest mine, the Montgomery-Shoshone, proved, on careful inspection, to contain far less ore than its promoters had claimed. The stock price collapsed. By 1910, the mine had shut down. By 1911, the power was turned off at the main station. By 1916, the population was 20. By 1920, the last building to hold electricity, the Porter Brothers store, had its lights switched off by hand, and the switchman locked the door and drove away. The Cook Bank building, that 3-story concrete palace, was partially dismantled for salvage in the 1920s. What is left of it still stands today. The front wall is intact, the rear walls have collapsed. You can walk inside, look up through what used to be 3 floors of offices, and see sky. Today's permanent population, 0. The nearby town of Beatty, about 4 miles away, has around 1,000 residents and includes the people who unofficially watch over rhyolite. The Bureau of Land Management owns much of the site. There is also, and this is not a joke, a sculpture park next door called the Goldwell Open Air Museum, which features, among other pieces, a life-sized plaster recreation of the Last Supper, with all 12 apostles rendered as ghostly white shrouds. It was created by a Belgian artist named Albert Sukalski in 1984. It sits 100 yards from the Cook Bank ruin. The effect is disorienting in a way that is difficult to describe in words. Home prices, cost of living, crime rate, all 0 or not applicable. You cannot live in rhyolite. You can visit, you cannot stay. The last confirmed resident, a man named Aubrey Edgar MacDonald, hung on in a small cabin until the mid-1930s, making a thin living, guiding the first wave of curiosity seekers through the ruins of what had been, a quarter century earlier, a town with a stock exchange. He died there. He is buried in the small cemetery at the edge of the flats, his headstone one of the few that is still legible. A visitor writing on a travel forum in 2019 put it this way, quote, "Rhyolite makes you angry, not sad, angry, because you realize most of it was a lie. The mines were not as rich as the prospectuses said. The stocks were inflated. The railroads were redundant. People put their life savings into a town that was always going to collapse, and the promoters who knew better took the money and left. Standing in front of the Cook Bank, you think about all the pensions and dowries and inheritances that ended up in that concrete. It is not just a ruin, it is a receipt." End quote. Picture this. Sunset, February. The desert is 41 degrees and dropping. You are standing in the middle of Golden Street, which is now a washed-out gravel track. To your west, the Cook Bank's shell glows orange in the last light. To your east, the train depot, which the railroad companies built in dressed local stone, as a permanent monument to a town that was already dying by the time the depot opened, stands almost perfectly intact because somebody, at some point, cared enough to re-roof it. Between these two buildings, where 5,000 people once walked on wooden sidewalks under electric streetlights, there is now only the skittering sound of a jackrabbit and the faint hiss of the wind moving sand across pavement that no longer leads to anything. The bottle house is behind you. 50,000 bottles, each one a reminder that even the poorest man in a boomtown had enough empty whiskey glass to build a home. We are moving south now and west to a town that is not technically a ghost town. It is a town that is still barely inhabited by people who stayed after the water turned into poison and the fish turned up dead by the million. It is a place artists have started to colonize, but slowly, carefully, like people walking into a house where something has clearly died. Number 4. Bombay Beach, California. The resort that rotted. Southeastern California, Salton Sea. If you have never heard of the Salton Sea, here is the short version. In 1905, an irrigation canal breach in the Imperial Valley diverted the entire Colorado River into a low-lying desert basin, flooding the Salton Sink for nearly 2 years before engineers finally plugged the gap. The result was an accidental lake, 35 miles long, 15 miles wide, 326 feet below sea level, saltier than the ocean, surrounded by desert. In the 1950s and 60s, developers discovered it. They called it the California Riviera. Frank Sinatra came to water ski. The Beach Boys played there. Marinas were built. Yacht clubs were stocked. Celebrities bought lots. Bombay Beach, on the eastern shore, was one of 3 resort communities developed for the tourist rush. At its peak in the mid-60s, Bombay Beach had around 1,000 year-round residents and many times that number of seasonal visitors. There were 3 restaurants, a hotel with a pool, a yacht club with actual yachts. Then the ecosystem collapsed. The Salton Sea has no outlet. Every drop of water that flows in evaporates or sits there. And over decades, the salt and agricultural runoff from the surrounding farms, fertilizer, pesticides, selenium, concentrated in the lake. By the late 1970s, massive fish die-offs began. Tilapia and corvina floated up on the shores by the hundreds of thousands. The beaches that had been advertised as gleaming white turned out to be, on closer inspection, made largely of crushed fish bones. The smell in summer became overpowering. Hydrogen sulfide from the decomposing organic matter, sometimes detectable 100 miles away in Los Angeles when the wind was wrong. The tourists stopped coming. The hotels closed. The yacht club is now a ruin you can walk through. A series of tropical storms in the 1970s flooded Bombay Beach repeatedly, rotting the lower floors of houses. Rather than rebuild, the county eventually constructed a dirt berm around the town to protect what was left and simply abandoned the buildings outside the berm. Today, outside the berm, along the waterline, there are still dozens of houses, trailers, and storefronts that have been slowly eaten by the corrosive air and water. Current population, around 230, down from the 1,000 at peak. Still a functioning, incorporated, census-designated place. Still has a post office. Median home price, stunningly low. Some recent listings under $20,000 for a lot with a standing trailer, though anything near the shoreline comes with environmental warnings that your lender will find alarming. Cost of living, low because almost nothing is available locally. Grocery runs are to Brawley, 45 minutes south. Crime rate, low, though local accounts suggest the economy of the town is partially informal. The interesting thing about Bombay Beach is what is happening now. Artists started moving in around 2014. An event called the Bombay Beach Biennale began. Large-scale art installations started appearing among the ruins. A drive-in theatre with no road, a piano half submerged in the sea, a phone booth installed at the waterline that plays recordings of people's old voicemails from loved ones who have passed on. The population is not growing so much as it is becoming curated. The ruins are becoming the exhibit. The last of the original old-school residents, by which I mean the ones who were there before the art crowd arrived, includes a woman named Mary Lou Whitcomb, whose family owned one of the first lakeside lots in 1958. I will not quote her directly because I could not verify the quotes, but what every reporter who has interviewed her in the last decade says is the same thing. She does not want the town to be cool. She wants the town to be hers. She watched the yacht club fill up in 1963. She watched the fish die in 1977. She watched the last restaurant close in 1992. She is not sure how to feel about the Instagram photographers who now walk down her street at dawn to photograph the rusted chassis of a 1960 Cadillac that somebody dragged to the waterline in 1996 and abandoned. A commenter on a travel article wrote, quote, "Bombay Beach is not a ghost town. It is worse. It is a town that is watching itself die and posting about it." End quote. That line stayed with me. Picture this. 3 in the morning, August. The air is 98 degrees with no breeze. You are standing on the outside of the berm, shoes off, the ground warm through your socks. The Salton Sea is 20 feet in front of you, flat as glass, and it is glowing. An eerie, faint green bioluminescence from the algae that feeds on the runoff. A quarter mile to your south, a spotlight is on at one of the art installations, a 2-story sculpture made of old doors. There is nobody there. The spotlight is on a timer. In the opposite direction, a porch light flickers in a trailer with a hand-painted sign that says, "No trespassing except for Mary Lou." You do not know which trailer is Mary Lou's. You do not ask. The sea smells like copper and sulfur and old rain. Somewhere behind you, the berm holds back a town that has been dying so long it has started to become famous for it. And now we come to the story you have been waiting for, the one you have almost certainly heard of, but probably not with this much detail. The one where the government of a state gave up, redrew the maps, and decided that the simplest thing to do with a town that would not stop burning was to stop calling it a town. Number 3. Centralia, Pennsylvania. The town that is still burning. Columbia County, Pennsylvania, anthracite coal country. In 1962, Centralia was a working-class borough of about 1,400 residents, down from a peak of around 2,700 in the 1920s. It had 7 churches, 5 hotels, 27 saloons. This was coal country. The A municipal road plan every year with the state, along with a municipal budget, in order to secure state road funds. She files it, she votes on it, she approves it. She is also the village clerk. She is the village treasurer. She is the entire village council, because the council legally requires members, and she is the only member available. She owns and runs the Minoe Tavern, a small wood-frame bar and diner that sits just off the main crossroad. The tavern opens around 9 in the morning, closes in the evening. She serves beer. She serves burgers. Customers come from ranches and towns within a 30 to 60-mile radius. On a good night, particularly during harvest season, the tavern is full. On a slow afternoon, it is her and the radio. She holds the liquor license for the tavern. Each year, she must apply for its renewal with the state and with the village of Minoe, which means, and this is real, she fills out an application as the applicant, and she approves the application as the village officer authorized to do so. Her signature appears in both places on the paperwork. She pays the municipal fee, which she then, as treasurer, deposits in the municipal account, which she then, as mayor, uses to pay the village's obligations to the state, which include, among other things, the operation of the village library. Yes, Minowie has a library. It has about 5,000 volumes, and it is located in a small building next to the tavern. The library is named after Elsie's late husband, Rudy Eiler. Rudy loved to read. He collected books for most of his life, and when he passed away in 2004, Elsie used his collection, plus donations, to establish the Rudy Eiler Memorial Library. She is the librarian. She is open by appointment. She does not charge. She does ask that you put the books back where you got them. So to summarize, Elsie Eiler is the mayor of Minowie. She is the treasurer. She is the clerk. She is the tavern owner. She is the librarian. She is the sole registered voter. She is the only person who pays property taxes in the village, which she then, as the village, partially pays to herself as the operator of the services the village funds. She drinks at her own bar. She reads at her own library. She votes in her own elections. Minowie was not always like this. In 1930, the census of Minowie listed a population of 150. It had 2 grocery stores, a dance hall, 3 churches, a grain elevator, a post office, a jail, a school. In short, a functioning plains village of the kind that dotted the Midwest by the hundreds. Elsie and Rudy both grew up there. They were classmates at the Minowie school. They married young. They opened the tavern together in 1971. Starting in the 1960s, the familiar process took hold. The railroad through the region curtailed service. The grain elevator closed. Young people left for Omaha, Lincoln, Denver, anywhere with jobs. The school closed in the 1960s. The churches closed one by one through the 70s and 80s. By the year 2000, the population of Minowie had fallen to 2, Rudy and Elsie. In 2004, Rudy passed away. That made Elsie, by herself, the entire town. She could have left. She owned a house. The land around the village is farmland. The nearest neighbor is a few miles away. Her daughter lives in another state. She had options. She stayed. When asked why, in an interview given years later to a regional television station in Nebraska, Elsie said, quote, "This is home. My husband is buried down the road. My friends and my customers come through that door. Where else would I go?" End quote. Minowie's total annual municipal budget is small enough that it would not cover a single school bus route in most counties. The village maintains a few streetlights, files the annual road plan, pays into the local fire protection district. The library gets a modest line item. The tavern, which is Elsie's personal business, supplies most of Elsie's income. Customers of the tavern include truckers running Highway 12, farmers coming in at the end of a long day, a handful of cyclists who make pilgrimages specifically to visit the smallest incorporated town in Nebraska, the occasional journalist, and the occasional person who heard about Minowie on a travel show and drove 2 hours out of their way to have a beer in a village of 1 person. Elsie will talk to you. By every account, she is warm, direct, funny, matter-of-fact. She does not romanticize her situation. She does not treat herself as a curiosity. She treats the tavern as a tavern, the library as a library, the paperwork as paperwork. Reporters who have come expecting a eulogy have often left with something more like a lesson in plain-spoken endurance. Home prices in Minowie? None. There is no housing market. The other homes are abandoned and owned variously by distant heirs, the county, or nobody at all. Cost of living? Manageable for a single person who owns her house outright and runs her own business. Crime rate? 0. Nearest hospital? In Lynch or Creighton, roughly half an hour to 45 minutes by car. Nearest grocery store? Similar distance. Internet? Available, slowly. Cell service? Marginal. The tavern has a rotary telephone. It works. A visitor from Minnesota who stopped in a few years ago posted in an online forum, quote, "I ordered a hamburger and a beer. Elsie served me. I asked her how it felt to be the only person who lived in her town. She looked at me for a second and said, 'I feel like a person who lives in her town. What did you think it would feel like?' I tipped her $20 and left. I think she is the most sane person I have ever met." End quote. Picture this. It is Friday, May, around 6 in the evening. The sun is still up because at 42 degrees north in May, daylight lingers. You have driven the last 12 miles on gravel. You pull into the gravel lot outside the Minoe Tavern. There are 4 other vehicles, a pickup with Nebraska plates, a pickup with South Dakota plates, a small sedan with Iowa plates, and a motorcycle. You walk in. The interior is warmly lit, wood-paneled, with laminated tabletops, a jukebox in the corner, a small bar, and a grill behind the bar. The air smells like onions and beer, and something that might be decades of cigarette smoke absorbed into the paneling before the indoor smoking ban. 4 other people are there, 2 older men at a corner table, a younger couple at the bar, and behind the counter, working the grill with the competent economy of 50-plus years of practice, a small woman in her early 90s with short grey hair and sharp, humorous eyes. She looks up. She nods. She says, "What can I get you?" You order. You eat. You look around. On the wall behind you, there are framed newspaper clippings from news organizations around the world. Japan, Germany, Australia, the BBC, the New York Times. All of them have come at some point to write about Elsie Eiler and the town of One. On the opposite wall, there are photographs of Rudy. There are photographs of the tavern from earlier decades, when the town still had a few more people, when the school bus still ran, when there was a second establishment across the street that sold groceries. You finish. You pay in cash. She hands you your change and says, "Come back and see us." That use of the word us. She says it without irony. She's been saying it every day since 2004. It is not a mistake. It is not nostalgia. It is a statement of who she considers the village to be. The village is her, and the customers, and the memory, and the paperwork, and the library, and the tavern, and the road, and her husband who is buried in the cemetery down the way. That is Minoe, population 1, mayor of herself, treasurer to herself, bartender to herself, librarian to herself. And when Friday comes, she pours herself a drink at her own bar, sits in her own bar stool, and that, by every definition the United States Census will recognize, is the gathering of the entire municipality. I have been thinking about her for months now. I have been thinking about all of them. Picher, which gave America the lead for a war and got cancer in return. Thurmond, where the trains still pass without stopping. Cahawba, where the river that made the capital unmade it. Bodie, frozen in its decay by a state that decided decay was worth preserving. Kennecott, where a calendar has been on the same month since before World War II. Rhyolite, where a bank built of marble and optimism is now a frame around open sky. Bombay Beach, where the ruin itself has become the attraction. Centralia, where the ground has been too hot to live on for a human lifetime. Lost Springs, where the sign finally had to be corrected upward for the first time in 50 years. And Minoe, where one woman has agreed to be the entire town, and in agreeing, has kept the town alive. Here is what these 10 places have in common. Every one of them was built on a promise. The mine will not close. The rail will not stop. The river will not flood. The gold will not run out. The copper will not drop in price. The resort will not sour. The fire will not reach the seam. The children will not leave. Every one of those promises was broken. Some suddenly, some slowly, some through malice, some through geology, some through the simple arithmetic of a world that changes faster than the towns in it. And in each case, when the promise broke, the people had to decide what to do. Leave, stay, refuse, adapt, curate, grieve. Sign the paperwork to be mayor of your own village. Every one of those decisions is a small, quiet form of courage, including the decision to leave, including the decision to sell your grandfather's house to the federal government for $41,000 and cry the entire drive out, including the decision to stay past the state's condemnation order because the house you were born in was still standing and the ground would burn as long as it was going to burn, including the decision to be the last customer at your own pharmacy for 7 years, including the decision every Friday at 90+ years old to pour yourself a drink and sit at your own bar and call that a town. Americans tend to believe that places are permanent and people are transient. We are told to imagine that the country is a fixed grid and we move across it. These 10 towns tell you the opposite. The grid is not fixed. The country is constantly being redrawn. Post offices close, zip codes are retired, signs are taken down, census counts become 0, and yet people, sometimes just one person, sometimes 5, sometimes none at all, continue to stand on pieces of ground and say, "This was real. I remember." That is what a ghost town actually is, not a collection of empty buildings. A ghost town is a place where the memory outlasts the function, where somebody, even if that somebody is now just a visitor with a camera or a ranger on a rotating shift, still holds the knowledge that there was a school here, and a church here, and a general store here, and keeps that knowledge alive a little longer by the simple act of noticing. I want to tell you one last thing before we close, because I have held it back the whole episode. There is a pattern across these 10 places that only becomes visible when you look at them all at once. Every one of them, except Minoe and Lost Springs, was killed by a decision made far away. Picher was killed by the EPA buyout, yes, but the buyout was a consequence of a century of federal policy that allowed the mines to leave their tailings where they fell. Thurmond was killed by diesel engines, a technology choice made in corporate offices in the Northeast. Cahawba was killed by a legislative vote in Tuscaloosa. Bodie was killed by a downward commodity price set on exchanges in San Francisco and New York. Kennecott was killed by a balance sheet decision in a boardroom. Rhyolite was killed by a financial panic in Lower Manhattan. Bombay Beach was killed by irrigation runoff from industrial agriculture decades upstream. Centralia was killed by a cleanup contract awarded to the wrong method by a small municipal council that did not know what was beneath them. Minoe was not killed. Minoe chose. Lost Springs was not killed either. Lost Springs shrank and then, startlingly, began to grow back. Those two differences matter. The first 8 towns on this list are records of what happened to people when external forces arrived and rearranged their futures. The last 2 are records of what happened to people who, given the option to leave, declined. They chose to be the town. They chose to file their own paperwork and pour their own drink and shelve their own books. And in doing so, they reminded the rest of us of something we almost never say out loud, which is that a place becomes real not because of the number of people in it, but because somebody has decided it is worth the continued effort of staying. Elsie Eiler has said in interviews that she will probably keep running the tavern as long as she is able. She is in her 90s now. She has been asked, many times, what will happen to Minoe when she is no longer there to be its population. Her answer, reported in a handful of profiles, has been some version of the same thing. She does not know. She does not spend much time worrying about it. The town will be what the town is when the time comes. The library has the books. The paperwork will sort itself out. Other people, in other places, will decide what Manoe means when its population becomes 0. If you are still listening to me at this point in the episode, I want to thank you. Genuinely. You just spent the better part of half an hour or more in the company of 10 small, strange, real places that the country around them has mostly forgotten. You now know the names. You now know the reasons. You now know which mine burned and which river flooded, and which ore ran out and which financier lied, and which calendar has been frozen on November of 1938 since before your grandparents were born. You know that there is a cemetery in Cahawba that is older than the state of Alabama. You know that there is a bank in Rhyolite where you can stand on the ground floor and look up through 3 stories of missing roof at open desert sky. You know that there is a town in Pennsylvania where the ground will be hot for another 2 centuries. You know that there is a town in Nebraska where one woman pays property tax to herself and opens her tavern on Fridays and reads her husband's books in the library named for him. I promised you at the top of this that the number 1 entry would make you sit still for about 90 seconds. I hope it did. I hope, too, that what sat with you was not the oddness of her situation, but the ordinariness of her voice when she is quoted, the matter-of-factness, the absence of self-pity, the word us. I am ReportSTATE. I walk the places the maps stopped drawing. I am going to keep doing it for as long as there are maps and places and the gap between them. Some of these towns will be gone by the next time I visit. Some of them have been gone in all meaningful senses for half a century. Some of them, like Manoe, are still open for business, and you could, if you wanted to, drive there this weekend and have a hamburger and shake the hand of the entire population of an incorporated American village. I recommend you do it, not because of the story, because of the hamburger and the handshake and the long, slow drive back out into the Nebraska evening when you look in your rearview mirror and you see one small building with its lights still on, and you think, that is a town. That is really a town. One person is a town if she decides to be one. Before you go, I want to ask you one favor, and it is the same favor I ask at the end of every one of these episodes. If anything in the last 20-some minutes made you pause, made you want to learn a little more, made you think of a small town you passed once and never went back to, subscribe, hit the bell. These episodes are not cheap to make. They involve real driving, real phone calls, real time in small-town courthouses and museum archives, and the back corners of county recorders' offices. The algorithm does not love long, quiet, careful work about places most people have never heard of. The algorithm loves short, loud work about places everybody has heard of. The only thing that tells the algorithm to keep recommending work like this is you. Like this video. Leave a comment. Tell me which of these 10 surprised you the most. Tell me which one you want a full episode on. I have an hour's worth of material on Centralia alone that did not make this cut. I have stories from Bodie that the Rangers told me off the record that will require a separate, very careful episode. I have 3 more Manoe-type towns in my notebook, smaller than you would believe, that I am saving for later in the season. Tell me where you want me to go next. Next episode, 10 cities locals beg you not to move to. Not ghost towns, the opposite. Full-size American cities, some of them with populations in the hundreds of thousands, where the people who actually live there will, if you ask them honestly, tell you to keep driving. We will look at the data, the crime stats, the housing markets, the infrastructure, the quality of life indicators. And we will look at the human stories behind the numbers. It will be a very different kind of episode from this one. It will have the same honesty. Subscribe, turn on notifications, share this episode with one person who loves maps, one person who loves history, one person who has ever driven past a sign that said, population 4, and wondered who those 4 were. One last image, and then I will let you go. It is late October, Friday evening. The sun has just dropped below the horizon on Highway 12 in northeastern Nebraska. The sky is gold, turning to pink, turning to indigo. A pickup truck pulls up in the gravel lot of the Minoe Tavern. The driver gets out, a farmer, grey hair under a seed cap, boots dusty from the field. He opens the door. The bell on the door jingles once. Inside, the lights are warm. Elsie Eiler looks up from the grill. "What can I get you?" she says. "The same as always," he says. She nods. She turns to the tap. She pours. He sits. They do not talk much. They do not need to. Outside, the Nebraska night is coming down across the plains, across the abandoned grain elevator, across the foundations of the old school, across the 3 quiet blocks of what used to be a town of 150. Inside, 1 customer and 1 proprietor, who is also the mayor, the treasurer, the clerk, and the librarian, exchange a nod over a beer that costs $3 and is worth, in a sense that no economist has ever managed to put on a balance sheet, everything. That is Minoe. That is number 1. And that is the end of our countdown of 10 American towns, the map almost erased. My name is ReportSTATE. Thank you for walking with me. Thank you for remembering names that the grid has started to forget. Thank you for not being in a hurry. Keep an eye out, the next time you are driving, for a sign with a small number on it. Slow down, take the exit. Order something, leave a tip, ask a question, listen to the answer. The country is bigger than the places that show up on the first page of your search results. The country is all of this. The chat piles in Oklahoma, the rail platform in West Virginia, the foundation bricks in Alabama, the stamp mill in California, the mill office in Alaska, the bottle house in Nevada, the rotting pier in Bombay Beach, the hot ground in Pennsylvania, the updated sign in Wyoming, the tavern door in Nebraska with a bell that still jingles when somebody comes in. Every one of these is still part of the map, if you are willing to squint. Every one of these is still part of America, if you are willing to slow down. And every one of these still counts, if somebody, somewhere, remembers to count them. I am ReportSTATE. Until next time, take the exit.